So, good afternoon and welcome to today's Business as Usual. We are really thrilled to have our guest today, who I'll introduce momentarily. And I'm Audrey Russo, I'm President and CEO of the Pittsburgh Technology Council. And with me is Jonathan Kirsting, who's Vice President of Visibility and also my partner as we do Tech Vibe Radio. So a few things about today's call, and it wouldn't have been possible without the support of Huntington Bank. They have been working, for very intensely on the SBA and all the stimulus opportunities that are provided for us during these tough times, but they're a long-time SBA provider, and they do a tremendous amount of work in our community. So the work they do now could not be more critical. And I also want to thank the team at AT&T for their continued support in terms of our public policy series, and more importantly, the support that they actually have been providing the broader community during this pandemic. And just this week, AT&T announced 3 months of frontline free wireless service for nurses who are actually on the front line and physicians nationwide through their FirstNet network. And it was built with AT&T in a public-private partnership with First Responder Network, as well as an additional $10,000 that went locally to support 412 Food Rescue, who we'll have tomorrow on our show. So as a quick programming note, for next Monday and next Monday only, and we'll continue to send this out, we are going to move this call to 1 p.m. to host Dr. Louis Falo. He's the chair of dermatology at the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine, and he's working, one of the most remarkable leaders working to develop a vaccine and breakthrough vaccine to deliver systems to literally help save the world. So I hope that you will understand why we moved it. We wanted to accommodate his schedule, and then the next day we're back to our noon schedule, and we have Senator Bob Casey at noon. So just a little bit about the technology, and then we'll jump in. So most of you have noticed that we have muted your microphones, and we've done that intentionally because we want to make sure that the noise is kept to a minimal. So appreciate you understanding that. But that said, we also have interactivity, and the interactivity is there's a chat box at the bottom of your screen, and we want to make sure that you can ask questions and that we have time for that. So if you have a question, just type your name in, along with your company name, and we should be able to get to the questions. So with that, I just want to jump right in to thank and bring on Congressman Mike Doyle, who is a longtime friend of ours in the tech community and has been representing us in Washington for quite a while. And he is near and dear to the issues that matter to all of us in tech by his leadership roles. And I just want to jump in. So welcome to our show. And you ready for us to start some questions?
Okay. Audrey, thank you so much. Glad to be here. This has become the new normal, doing Zoom meetings all day long, and particularly pleased to be here today with the Pittsburgh Technology Council. So what do you want to chat about?
So let's see, let's start. The Paycheck Protection went live, like, what was it, 2 weeks ago? I mean, it seems like a long time. So for companies who could participate, it will provide a much needed lifeline. We heard that Congress may come back and add more funds to it to make sure that it remains capitalized and doesn't run short of funds, but we've heard that it has run short of funds. So can you share what you're hearing as of this moment?
Yeah, actually today we received a notice from Dr. Kelly Hunt, who's the Pittsburgh SBA director, that the emergency program had exhausted its money and that the PPP was very close to doing the same. And that banks would not be taking new applications. When you think about the fact that we've gone through $349 billion in less than 2 weeks, it's kind of mind-boggling. Okay. So what do? Right now, the Senate is in negotiations on a package that would recapitalize the program, I believe at $250 billion, but there's some other negotiations going on along with that. The hope is that by unanimous consent sometime today or tomorrow, although as of today we have no indications that it will be today, they could pass it in the Senate and send it down to the House of Representatives early next week, which is somewhat problematic. We would like to be able to pass it by unanimous consent. But, you know, last time we tried to do this, a member from Kentucky, Tom Massey, insisted on a roll call vote. When you do unanimous consent, it only takes one person to object, and then you have to go through regular order. We're hoping that doesn't happen. If it does, it would require at least 218 of us coming to Washington to show that we have a quorum, so that we could take a voice vote. But so we're waiting to see. But obviously the program needs to be recapitalized, and we need to do it right away, because there's not going to be new applications taken until we do. So Congress really needs to move on this quickly.
So is there any sense of those people who actually have their applications in, that they will continue to be processed?
Well, I know they said they're not going to take new applications. My hope is that the ones they have are still being processed, and until, you know, the entire $349 billion is committed, that, you know, they'll continue to move those applications to the SBA. I think it's better to be in the pipeline than not be in the pipeline right now. But obviously we need to recapitalize that program. You know, there was another $500 billion allocated to large corporations that were impacted severely by the pandemic. And, you know, a lot of us are wondering aloud, since that program isn't really up and running yet, could that money just be transferred right away over to the PPP and the emergency program to give us a little bit of time to just recapitalize that program. So we're waiting to see. We're waiting to get information from our leadership, and as we speak right now, we just don't have a definitive answer.
So, right, and I realize that's just fresh off the press, so appreciate your commenting on that. So beyond the CARES Act, many people think the economy is going to need considerably more stimulus. So how are the discussions going on in terms of this sort of next round, even on top of what you just articulated?
Yeah, I mean, I can remember early on that a lot of us thought we were going to be moving on to the recovery package, which would have been an infrastructure bill. Obviously, that's not going to happen anytime soon. I think, you know, the next package you're going to see out, obviously, is this one we just talked about. But I think a package after that may look a little bit more like CARES Point 2, 2.0, as opposed to an infrastructure bill. You know, there's still many glitches with the system, the stimulus checks. A lot of people were trying to get their direct deposit information into that IRS system. They're getting a lot of error codes. They're trying to work with that. There's still some people that haven't even been able to get on the list yet, the non-filers and certain other categories. And these are some of the people that need the money the most. Unemployment compensation, you know, we passed the federal pandemic unemployment compensation, which puts an additional $600 on top of state unemployment, and for the first time made self-employed and independent contractors eligible to collect unemployment compensation. But the state of Pennsylvania still doesn't have a platform set up to accept applications from self-employed and independent contractors. They're hoping to have that by the end of this week or very early next week, so that those folks can get in the queue for their checks. Now, it will be retroactive to the day they couldn't work, and they waived the 1 week waiting period. But still, it's going to be weeks before a lot of people see this money, and that's a problem.
So do we have any, Jonathan, are there some questions out there yet?
Absolutely. And like I said, this is always my favorite part, because we've got some great people out there with some great questions. And so the first one we have here is, what's your position on allowing chambers of commerce to be eligible for the PPP, like the 501c6s and so forth?
Yeah, I know that's been talked about, and my immediate concern is we've got so many people in the pipeline right now that aren't getting money yet, and we've blown through the $349 billion. Part of me thinks until we can get that bottleneck taken care of, that to add more people into that application process. But I know, Phil, have you heard anything further on the 501c6s?
I know there's an effort underway to include them, but it's something, it sounds like, that would need to be done through new legislation. So there's a lot of fixes, for startups, for lots of other folks that were not included in the original CARES bill. I think that folks are talking about trying to make those fixes in the next one. And so, it really is just going to depend on what this next package looks like.
Yeah, apparently some of it can't be done administratively. It's going to have to be done with legislation. So that would slow that process down a little bit, but it's being talked about in a future package.
So Jonathan, another one?
Yeah, these are really, they're rolling in short and steady right now. So here's so this is from Ed Reese. He asks, under the CARES Act, there are provisions for municipalities under 500,000 to receive funding. Do you know if Allegheny County is applying for these funds and how these funds may be utilized for current and future infrastructure investments?
Yeah, the only cities that got direct money were over 500,000. Philadelphia, it was the only city in Pennsylvania. So the rest of that money went to the state. And then that's going to be, think about it almost like community development block grant money where, Allegheny County and city of Pittsburgh get their money directly, as did like McKeesport and Penn Hills. Others had to apply to the county. Well, in this case, the county has to apply to the state for the money. And it's my understanding that Rich Fitzgerald has done that. And that I don't know what the exact number was, but it's kind of proportionate to the population of Allegheny County as to how much they're getting, but I know that's in process.
Jonathan, another question? Yeah,
let's keep them going. So this is from Griffin Schultz. He's a regular here on our webcast. Thanks, Griffin. He says, let me see here. There are state Department of Transportation projects that have been on hold for health and safety reasons, which of course he totally supports. But will states have the funds and budgets to restart those projects once the stay-at-home policy is finally lifted?
Boy, that's a good question. We know that we've been trying to get more money to the states. We did in one package, and part of the negotiations that are taking place today in the Senate was that in addition to recapitalizing the PPP and the emergency grant program, we also wanted to get some extra money to the states and to the hospitals. The Senate Democrats had proposed, I believe it was $150 billion to the states and localities and $100 billion to the hospitals because they're still struggling. Hopefully we get enough money to the states that we can keep their budgets from being put in a position where they can't do the projects. I think in the state of Pennsylvania, like a lot of, they separate capital funds from others, and hopefully some of that money is still available. And obviously when these projects move forward will vary from state to state and locality to locality based on what's going on with the virus.
Okay, how about one more question and then I'll jump into another one.
Absolutely, absolutely. So this is from Chris Smith. Has there been any word one way or another regarding the initiative to begin opening some non-essential businesses that can theoretically practice social distancing while functioning? And he says, keep doing Swissvale proud.
Hi, Chris. Hey, I think, governors all over the country and Governor Wolf's no exception have been planning for what a reopening looks like. In the East Coast here, the governor is coordinating with governors of other states. I believe it's 5 or 6 other states, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and some others about how this reopening would take place. I think, it's going to be done in phases. It's going to start in areas where there's not hot spots first. And it's going to move cautiously. Obviously, the 2 most important elements to that are going to be the availability of PPE, and there's a global shortage of that, so that becomes very important. And equally or more important is testing. We're going to have to ramp up testing. There's talk of mobile testing units going to businesses that reopen and testing employees there. We want to make sure that there's an incentive for employees to be tested, that they're not penalized if someone tests positive and has to be quarantined. And that's the key to this as we start to reopen. We can't allow another outbreak of this, so we have to act quickly when someone tests positive to get them in a monitored quarantine, but to make sure they don't lose their paycheck and put themselves in a tough position. So these plans are being made by the governors. The president made it clear, I guess, the other day that the governors will be doing these things. And like I said, I think it's going to be different in every state. Obviously, in some states in the country where there's very little incidence of this and no hotspots, you'll see those areas probably open sooner than, areas like New York and Philadelphia is still somewhat of a hot spot. Western Pennsylvania, we're not out of the woods yet, but we're looking better in terms of the amount of new cases declining. Our hospital system, which we're really blessed to have just a premier healthcare systems in Western Pennsylvania. We have talked with UPMC and the Allegheny Health Network, and both have ample bed space and ventilators, and they're equipped. And as long as we keep doing what we have to do as individuals, we all have a personal responsibility to this country and to our families and friends to keep the social distancing in order, and as we reopen businesses, to make sure that we do it in a way that's safe. So those plans are definitely underway, and we're all, we all want to get back to some semblance of normality. But let's be honest, this will never be pre-pandemic until there is a vaccine that can immunize the population. Until we have herd immunity through a vaccine and also a treatment regimen that has been proven to be safe and effective for those people who do contract the virus, people just aren't going to be comfortable going into, large area movie theaters, sports stadiums, that kind of situation. I think that's pretty far down the road. But I think that in many cases, we're going to have some limited reopenings that can grow as we see, the virus will dictate that. I think health and safety always has to be paramount, but we all want to get back to work. There's no question about that.
So I understand that multiple members of Congress have been diagnosed with COVID, and others obviously are in self-quarantine. Can you talk about how Congress is actually operating and will continue to operate?
Yeah, I mean, most of us are working remotely from our homes. We issued laptops to all my staff. All of my staff is in their homes. We work every day as if it was a normal work day. We check our answering machine on the hour. We're still doing casework, responding to calls coming into the office, doing lots of Zoom meetings with various groups and organizations. We have an e-newsletter that we get out fairly often, almost every week now, updating people on the coronavirus and on the programs. But we're not in Washington voting. And as we speak, the Rules Committee is meeting to discuss remote voting and proxy voting. We're not sure that we can get a remote system in place anytime soon. That would require a vote of the Congress, a change in the rules. We're looking into proxy voting too, where members can give their proxies. To ask West Coast members, particularly, to get in an airplane and fly for 5 hours to Washington, D.C. You can't put 435 members of Congress on the House floor. You just can't do that. It's not safe. Yet we're required to put our cards in a slot and press a button, or to fill out a card and hand it to the clerk. So, we're trying to work, we're looking for ways to work around that. But as we speak now, Monday through Friday from normal business hours, my staff is at their laptops and on call.
So, let me jump to talking about our manufacturing firms, many of whom have been deemed to be essential businesses. They've been looking for guidance from us. So they're asking us if we believe that the state or federal government might expand the shutdown orders, and others are beginning to look for guidance on how to operate safely. Can you talk about what you're seeing from the manufacturing sector and how you think we can preserve these critical jobs through this crisis?
Well, it's so important that we do, and the manufacturing sector has a huge role to play and helping us with the coronavirus. As you know, many of our manufacturers have shifted their operations to make face shields and masks and the like, and we need them to be doing that. I wish the president really would fully invoke the authority he has to compel manufacturers to do this, but many are doing it on their own. That's a good thing to see. I don't think you're going to see more shutdowns of that. I think you're going to see a gradual reopening of this in certain areas and in certain situations where it can be done safely, so that the workers there are protected. And that means getting them PPE so that they, gloves and masks, so that they can not infect others and not be infected. And also the testing regimen. But, the plan is not to be more, the only way we get more restricted is if we take our foot off the gas here in terms of practicing what the CDC is telling us to do, and we get an outbreak again, we get another hotspot or a spike. Right. That's what we don't want to happen. But I think, slowly but surely and gradually and the testing's going to be key to this. We've got to get more ability to test. One recommendation, I don't know, many of you may have heard Dr. Scott Gottlieb. He addressed our caucus, and I'm sure he addressed the Republican caucus too. And he was on Face the Nation last Sunday talking about what it looks like to reopen America. And one of the things he said about the testing, we do 1 million tests a week, but when you think about a population of 350 million, you're talking about 350 weeks to get everyone tested. Well, we can maybe ramp up to 2 million a week. But a lot of the giant labs that can do lots of testing, the Quests and the like, there's no way they're going to build they're not going to double their capacity by building another system and hiring, another 1,000 lab techs for testing that might only be needed for another 12 to 18 months until a vaccine's developed. So, that's something that the federal government's going to have to, fund or undertake. But the key is, Gottlieb talked about whenever we go into a healthcare system from now on, not for coronavirus, say you sprained your ankle. Well, when you go in there for that sprained ankle, you get swabbed and you get tested. We have to start to test a wide swath of America and mobile testing vans that would come to businesses that reopen and testing employees, people getting their temperature taken every day when they report for work. These are the kind of things we're going to have to do for a while until we develop the vaccine. And let me say another thing, the Pittsburgh should really be proud of the work that's being done in this city at UPMC and Pitt and other places. We are leading the way in many respects into some breakthroughs that are going to help us deal with this pandemic and hopefully eventually a vaccine. And to see them working in the same area where Jonas Salk, developed the polio vaccine was sort of make you, stick your chest out a little bit and said, yeah, this is what we do in Pittsburgh. Right. So that's how it's going to be, I think.
So we have a couple of more questions. So Jonathan, you want to tee up a couple? There's some good questions there.
Absolutely. So glad we had the time to take some of these. This is a really important one. A lot of people have been talking about this, from Clay Johnson. How is Congress fighting pork that is being placed into some of these packages?
Well, I think, there was a lot of publicity around one package that was being developed that was more of like part of the infrastructure package. Right. I think everybody must have heard about $25 billion or $1 million for the Kennedy Center. Exactly. That just spread everywhere. But the reality is that when you look at the packages that we've passed to date, they have been very narrowly focused. This is certainly not the time for Congress to be putting other projects that aren't COVID-19 related. Right. Obviously, that's where the money has to be right now. There'll come a time for an infrastructure bill, and a lot of people have a lot of different ideas on what that should look like. But I would say for the immediate future and for the next package or two, this is going to be strictly related on getting help out to individuals and small businesses and businesses of all sizes. especially, you know, we need to keep the mom and pops alive. And a lot of these folks are 1 or 2 or 10 people operations, and they need help right now. And so we need to focus on that and make sure that there's certainly no pork, and there's no the amount of money we're talking about trillions here. You know, we joke about how we don't talk about millions in Congress, only billions. We're talking trillions, and we're going to need more of it. And it's got to stay focused on making sure that businesses can stay afloat and that individuals can stay afloat and buy food and pay their bills and keep their homes, and that's got to be the key.
So what about, let's just talk a little bit about broadband. You have all these students now that are home, and they're, you know, obviously putting pressure on the system, but also having access. And last week, we worked with Aurora Innovation and Google to start a program called Beyond the Laptops to get about 7,000 laptops, new ones that are needed in the school to, you know, to make sure that everyone can actually do their work from home, because there won't be any school until the earliest of September or August. So talk about what Congress might be contemplating in this next round to help schools and districts, particularly low income and those that aren't even in the city.
Yeah, this is an issue that's near and dear to my heart. As you may know, I chair the Communications and Technology Subcommittee on Energy and Commerce. So this is right in the bailiwick of our committee's assignment. Mm-hmm. This pandemic should have demonstrated in stark terms that broadband and internet access isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. Think about what we have to do. Here we are right now, right, communicating with each other on the internet. How do you get your unemployment benefits? How do you get your stimulus check? How do you order your groceries? You need access to the internet, to broadband. I live in the Woodland Hills School District. My children went to school there. They're grown now. Woodland Hills had to do a funding drive to get laptops for a lot of their students whose families are too poor to be able to buy laptops. But then more importantly, they need access to the internet. You know how many families are driving their kids up near a hotspot? Maybe they go to a library or a McDonald's or somewhere where they can get some internet access just so they can do their homework. You talk about the learning gap in the country. The learning gap is who has access and who doesn't. And a lot of America doesn't have access to broadband. And those that do have access, a lot can't afford it. So it's a two-pronged challenge. You know, not only accessibility, but affordability. Some of the companies, you know, have stepped up. I know that Comcast has done a program in Pittsburgh that has been very popular and successful, and we want to continue to see those kinds of efforts too. But obviously, when we do an infrastructure bill, there has to be a broadband component to it. And as we're looking at 5G, we're in the process of looking at an auction at the FCC for 5G. This is that mid-band spectrum that's going to enable us to deploy a lot of the new things. It could be worth anywhere from $40 to $60 billion at auction time. Originally, they were going to do a private auction, and taxpayers weren't going to realize any money from that auction. Many of us, including myself, stood up and said that's absolutely not going to happen. And now they are looking at a public auction at the FCC. And what we're looking to do is capture as much of the proceeds from that auction as we can and dedicate that money to broadband deployment. In parts of rural America, this is a bipartisan issue, by the way. I went to my colleagues on the Republican side of the aisle and said, look, I live in the city of Pittsburgh. We're going to have 5G. Most of my city has access. My issues are more affordability in certain parts of my district. I said, but where you live, you don't even have access to 2G, let alone 5G. So they get it. And you know, it was not hard to get Republicans on board and make this a bipartisan effort to make sure we did this public auction. So that's very important. And it's being graphically demonstrated because of this pandemic that those of us that can do what we're doing right now have access to information. We can share information. We can get, you know, facts and things out to poke. people that don't have access to the internet, they're sitting in their houses and they're not sure what's going on.
Right. So Jonathan, we have a couple of good questions. So I want to make sure
Absolutely.
that we asked some of them. I know we can't get to all of them, being
Yeah.
sensitive to your time.
How about disregard the buzzsaw in the background here? So actually a really good one is the government looking at, so let me see here, where do I want to go here? Here we go. Okay, is the government looking at cell phone tracking as a way to keep tabs on people who are infected?
Yeah, that's being talked a lot about, and obviously some of our tech companies have, taken an initiative to put an app together to do that. It's very controversial. A lot of the people in the privacy community sort of don't like the idea that somebody in the government might be tracking them.
Right.
My understanding is that they're trying to develop it in a more anonymous way. And I'm going to ask Phil Murphy, who studies a lot of this kind of. Phil, what are some of the pros and cons of the tracking debate we're having?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple different efforts going on. There's some government initiatives, mostly focused, on the airline industry and doing contact tracing there. There's also a major effort that Google and Apple have announced to try to leverage the data that they collect from people's phones to do contract tracing that way. I mean, I think part of the problem right now is that, contract tracing is something that we can do and that's effective once we have a handle on who's infected and the infections become more reduced so that you're not dealing with all of the community transmission. But Mike's right, the congressman's right. I mean, I think there's a lot of privacy concerns over how that data is leveraged and who has access to it and potentially what other applications it's used for. So, but it's certainly something folks are talking about.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, we have spent more than 30 minutes allocated. Is there anything else that you want to say to us other than us thank you for taking the time and for your leadership over the years?
Well, I'm just happy to do it, and I think it's important we all keep in touch and share information. In another 28 minutes, I'll be doing this with a class at Pitt, talking about the process and the coronavirus. I just heard a funny story. Someone said, when this is all over, half of us are going to be really good cooks, and the other half are going to be alcoholics, and some might be both. But,
oh my goodness.
I'm learning how to make a lot of new interesting recipes. We're trying to.
What's your best recipe you got going now?
Yeah, well, I'm going to actually try to cook some tuna today and not cook it too much, so it's singed on the outside and rare on the inside.
Well, send us some photos. We'll share it.
Absolutely, man. Very cool.
Good to see everyone. Stay safe, okay?
Thank
Let's
you,
stay safe and let's all do our part.
Yes, thank you for doing your part. Thank you. So we're going to close. Thank you, Congressman. I want to thank again the teams at Huntington Bank and at AT&T for making everything possible that we do. Tomorrow, same time, we're going to love to see you back here. And we have Leah Lizarrando, CEO of 412 Food Rescue, to hear what's going on. We're keeping this at the forefront in terms of food and making sure that people have what they need. And food has been #1 for us here in Pittsburgh, along with the digital divide. So thank you all and stay tuned. Again, thank you, Congressman.
Thank you.